So welcome everyone to this Advanced Steel Project Explorer webinar. So before we start, my name's Rob Merriman. I'm one of the application engineers here at Graitec. I work as part of the structures team, with my main focus being on advanced steel, but we look at all areas of structures and AEC collection. And so if you do have any questions relating to structures in Revit or Navisworks or anything like that, please reach out and let us know if you need any help with anything. So today's webinar, is on the Advanced Steel Project Explorer, but I'll just run through the previous webinars that we've got coming up, or the previous webinars that we've run and the webinars we've got coming up. So we did one last week on advanced design, advanced steel, and the Revit workflow. Today is obviously the Advanced Steel Project Explorer. Later this week, John Bennett's doing an Advanced Steel and Plant 3D collaboration. And then later on, towards the end of April, I'm going to be looking at how you can use Navisworks in your collection to plan your advanced steel installation using your advanced steel model. And then we'll look at the advanced steel and Revit integration, and then back to advanced steel. I'm going to be running a webinar on how to check your model to eliminate drawing errors, so all the checking tools that we can use in advanced steel. And then finally, we'll look at Revit and advanced steel and a couple of workflows for modular buildings. Any of the ones that you have missed, or including today's ones, or any ones you want a recording of, if you can email marketing@graitec.com, those guys will be able to get you the recordings. So on to today's webinar. We're going to look at the Project Explorer and how it can increase your productivity when you're modeling, and we'll show you some tips and tricks in there. So the Project Explorer is in your advanced steel on the home ribbon, the very left hand side, and then we have all these different options within the Project Explorer. So today we're going to look at levels, we're going to look at model views, queries, groups, the model browser, and work planes. So that's all really that I'm going to show you in the presentation. So I'm actually just going to crack straight on and go straight into a live model, and we will start modeling. So again, could you guys just confirm in the questions for me? I've had confirmation that you can see me. Can you just confirm that you can see my advanced steel model just before I start cracking on with everything? Thank you, John. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Right, that's good. Don't want to go through doing all of this stuff in the model browser when you guys can't see anything. Okay, so we're going to go straight into it. I'm going to go straight into, so I have a model here. I'm going to go straight into the Project Explorer, and then we'll start working through all the different things that we've got in here. So we're going to start with levels. So we're going to click the Create Level button. So levels give you a slice through your model between certain heights. So we're going to look at, we'll create our level 0, which is our foundation. So the altitude is 0, and we'll create that, and it will activate it, so it will only show me the items at that level. And create another one in there. I have a mezzanine in here. So now I can type in the altitude or the height, and then I could use a base level if I wanted. So it's currently based from the foundation, but we can set that to none. And my mezzanine is 2,500. So now I'm just creating slices through the model, and in my model views I get my levels. So what I can do is, if I want to just show the mezzanine level, I click the light bulb and it will just isolate that level for me. So that is that's where we can create levels on a model that is existing. What I want to do now is when I create a level, you'll see that in my model views it's highlighted in it's bold, so that means the level is activated. So anything that we create on this level is now associated to the level. So what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate that, we'll create a new level. We'll call it number 2, and we'll call it second mezzanine. And this one we'll put at 3.5 meters. So we're going to put a second mezzanine, which is running from the first mezzanine up to the second mezzanine. So what I'm going to do, because everything in here is highlighted in bold, anything I model now, it will pick the snap points from the points I click. So if I hover over that column, it will pick the snap point at the top of the column, but it models everything associated to the level that I have it on. So if I choose perpendicular, so it's a bit complicated to do in a 3D model. What I can do is if I double click on my level, it will take me and set my UCS on that level, and then I can continue modeling. So we can choose perpendicular. We'll just put a few beams in. And because this level is activated, or everything I've created currently is associated to that level. So if we've made a mistake, or our engineers or the architect change the level of the steel, I don't have to go in and move everything. What I can do is I can say, right, well, the second mezzanine, if I change the properties of it to 4 meters, and we hit OK, those beams automatically move up with the level. So that's what we can do with levels. You can set them up at the beginning of your project, and then you can, if you're modeling on that level, double click on it to take you to a plan on that level and make sure it's activated, and then everything that you create will be associated to that level. The other clever thing that we can do, so we're going to move on, that's a real rough breakdown of levels. We're going to move on to work planes. So when we're creating things like columns and walls, we might want those also associated with particular levels and to adjust automatically for us. Now when you create columns and walls, the length of the column and the wall defaults to 3 meters, but what we can do is we can actually click here that I want a column to go from the foundation to the second mezzanine. And because I have both of these activated and I have them set up in this Work Planes tab, when I go to the Objects tab and create a column, I can actually click the start point up here, and it will create the column between the two work planes that I have chosen. So we'll finish that column in there, and we can do the same for a wall. If I now draw a wall between the node in there and the node in there, the wall is associated to those work planes. And the same happens if I have to change that second mezzanine. We change the properties of it again to say 4,500 this time. The column and the wall automatically adjust. Sorry, my printer's decided to kick into life in the background. Now there might be a time, so what you can do with those levels is, those work planes, is you can associate the columns and the walls to particular work planes and levels, so that as things change in the model, you don't have to manually adjust everything. Now there might be a scenario where you accidentally assign a column to a work plane, or you no longer want it associated with a work plane. So if I wanted to model a new column, I would just turn these two off, and the columns will go back to using the default 3 meters. But say this beam I don't want associated with the second mezzanine level anymore. What I can do is I can right click on the work plane, second mezzanine, and say detach elements and choose the beam. And then what you need to do, if you look in my command line, it says select the geometry points. So I need to select the 2 node points and right click. That beam is now no longer associated with that level or work plane. So if I change the properties of it back to 4 meters, you will see that that beam has stayed because I've deassociated it to the work plane and the levels. So you can be really clever with levels, and you can also attach things. If I go into the work planes, if I needed to reattach it, I would choose attach elements, and then I would again go to the geometry points. It's quite hard in a 3D, in a realistic view, to see those geometry points, so it is best to jump to a wireframe. So that is work planes. Today we are just covering the basics of these. We could go on for quite a long time on how these can be beneficial, but today is just an overview webinar and I don't want to keep you guys too long. So we're going to have a look at model views. So levels are for creating a slice through the model. The other way to visually isolate objects is to use model views. So we've all had the scenario where, say I want to just work on grid line C, you would have to select the items. Bring my tool palette, let's put that over this. So I bring my tool palette back. Then I'd have to isolate the items and then I could start working, but because I've got all of these rafters, it's when you isolate them, it's isolating the whole object. What I want to do is to have a tick box like the levels called model views. Let me just tidy the joints up. So what we can do is we can click the create new model view button. And then we have 4 ways of defining a model view. So I'll create 4 model views and we'll go through different ways of defining it. I'll start with at grid line. So if I choose a grid line, so grid C, and do a right click, it then says give your view a name. So we'll call this model view grid C. And then what you'll find is that it's asking you to define a default view direction. So wherever you create your model views, you then get these arrows which defines the default direction. These arrows can also be used to drive cameras. So you can set cameras up within the model roles. So if I want to view on grid line C, I'll choose this arrow. And then in my model views, I now have grid C. And all I have to do is tick the light bulb and it isolates everything based on this rectangle. So it now doesn't show the whole object. What it does is it just shows the object within that rectangle. And we can turn them on and off. So that's it based on a grid. So we'll put a few more in just so you can see everything. So we'll choose add a joint box. I've just turned all the joint boxes off, but I can still choose part of the joint. So we'll call this typical. So although I have got the joint boxes turned off, that haunch is associated with a connection. I can't quite see my arrows. So what I'll do, I'll go back in and I will turn everything on and we'll do that again. So at a joint box, we'll choose this side, we'll call it typical haunch. And then it asks me again for the default view direction, so I'll choose that one. And then I have a model view for a typical haunch. Let's say I want to create a model view just to view the roof structure. So what I can do with that one is I can say use 2 points in the UCS and a front and rear depth. So I can choose my first point, so we'll choose the node at the top of the column. And then that starts drawing me a rectangle. Although what I haven't done there is I haven't set my UCS first. So let me move my UCS to the correct height. So now I can pick the node point there, come over to the other column, choose the node point in there. Then the front depth, let's make that 1 meter, and the rear depth, let's make it 500, and we'll call that roof. The default view direction, so we just need to go and find the arrows. The arrows will center on your X and the 2 points we clicked in the X and the Y, so I can choose the arrow in there. If we have a look, I can go typical haunch, just hit the light bulb. So there's my haunch. Now you can turn these on and off at the same time, and there's my roof. Now with these, it's not quite showing me everything because of the node point I clicked, so you can select the model view and you have grips on it, so we can just stretch the model view based on the grips. So if we need to make it a little bit bigger just to see everything, we can do. And like I said, you can have multiple model views on, so we can turn grid line C on with the roof, and it will isolate just those 2 particular model views. So it's a lot more powerful than using the isolate commands in Advanced Steel, especially when you've got a complicated model like this. The last one we can do is 1 point in the UCS. So for example, if we wanted to do just this door header, we could call, or just this door, we could call it door. And so we want to view it from the outside, and then if we're not sure of our limits, what we can do is just activate the model view. And there is a view just on our door. Now the importance of choosing the view direction is because we can set up cameras automatically within these model views so that you don't have to put more cameras in your model, so you don't have to set up all the camera and set up all the model views. What we can do is select the model view. So I just clicked on the rectangle and I can right click and go to Advanced Properties. This is where we have all the options and the depths and the X and the Y. But if you look at camera properties, I can create an automatic drawing. We can call this grid C, and we can choose a style. So we'll choose a section style. So we'll choose section selected plus pickbox. We'll fix a scale in here. And that has done the camera for me. So if I was to run this drawing, open my drawing processes palette, we'll just do it on an A1 sheet, and I select the model view. And because there's a camera activated in the model view, it will run the drawing based on the model view. So you don't have to go through your model set. Once you've set up the model views to help you modeling, you don't have to go and set up a set of cameras. It will run it straight from the model view. So there's my section on grid C using all of the parameters from the model view. So that is our little section on model views. So next we're going to look at queries. So in Advanced Steel we can set up queries to search our model for certain criteria. They're called queries. Couple of examples I'm going to show you today. So we're going to look for model roll. Now in Advanced Steel, nothing has a bigger effect on the drawing output than the model roll. If you're modeling a rafter and you use the model roll beam, it will activate the beam drawing style. If you want it to activate the rafter drawing style, you need to call it rafter. So what we can do is we obviously don't want to double click on every beam to make sure it's got the correct rafter. What Advanced Steel does is if you use structural elements such as the gable or portal frame macro, or the stair macro, or the railing macro, or the ladder macro, all of those structural elements, the model roll will be put in automatically by Advanced Steel. The same with automatic connections from the connection vault. If we open the connection vault, Drag it onto the screen so you guys can see it. When I use a base plate, the macro automatically sets the model role of base plate. Only items that we model manually as detailers do we need to put the model role in. So what we want to do is we want to search this model for items that have a model role set as none. Because when you manually model an item, in the naming, the model role defaults to none. So when you're manually modeling items, you need to set those model roles. Like I said, we don't want to click on every item to find out if it has a model role or not. So we're going to create a new query. So what we want to do is search the complete model and give us a new marking. Then we choose what are we going to search for. So I'm going to search for beams, timber beams, compound welded beams, folded plate, grating, tapered beams, and special parts. Basically anything that I want to run a fabrication drawing on. So that's what what advanced steel elements I'm searching through. Then what I need to say is, it's in the naming tab, I want to search for a model role, so I tick model role. And then what type of model role am I searching for? So we can choose none. Now if I hit OK, what that would do is that would mark everything in red. So I'll do it for you. It'll mark everything in red. But what I have to then do is click select marked objects. Then I have to go and isolate everything. Then I can change my model roles. Then I need to turn everything back on. But what you can do is you can get your searches to appear in your Project Explorer. So if I go back to search and set that up again, because what I should have done is saved that search. So once you've set it up, I can hit save, and if I call it model role equals none, it will then appear in my Project Explorer under queries. So instead of having to select the marked objects, go to the isolate tab, I can just run that query and it will isolate the objects in the model. Now these are all beams. Got some AutoCAD lines in there, so just need to use the filter. So for the model role, I'm just going to call them beam. And if I untick the light bulb, it will set the model back to the state we had before. And then I can just keep running that search, and if there's nothing there, it means everything has a model role. The other searches we can do, I'll just do one more because there's something clever you can do with searches. Let's say in this model, I want to search for any beam element that, say for example, this model, my engineers have specified that all beams need to be grade 355. So what I want to do is I want Advanced Steel to highlight to me the beams that are not grade 355. So I can search for beam, compound welded beam, and a tapered beam, and under common properties for the material I can say search for a material that is not grade 355. So if I save this as beam not S355JR, that will highlight to me all of the beams in my model which are not 355, which in this case is most of them. Now the cold rolled items I know are not going to be 355. So on the Tools tab, if you scroll down, there is a little tool in here that selects all the cold rolled members. So I can say search all of that area for the cold rolled members. That should have done it. I'll enter to do the whole model. So that will have selected the cold roll members, and then I can say turn those objects off. So what I'm left with are just the beams, and then I could globally select those beams, use the beam filter, and then I could go and globally change a material. I think in there, because I've got some joints there controlled through the macro. But what we could do with this is just select everything there, I'll select the columns, for example, go to the beam filter, advanced properties, and then I can change the material in there to S355 JR. So that particular search, we're searching for not grade 355, so you can invert the searches. And we'll just turn everything back on. Okay, last few bits that we're going to cover in today's webinar. We'll just turn these joints off. The next little bit in our Project Explorer is groups. So if we want to isolate certain parts of the model that they didn't fall under a level, they didn't fall under a model view, they were sort of scattered all over the place, we can use groups to isolate these parts. So in groups, I click the folder button, which is the groups, and I create new groups. What I'm going to do is I want to see all my rafter assemblies, but I don't want to see all the cold rolled. I don't want to see the column. I literally just want to see the rafter assemblies. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to a right-hand end view. So I've created, if we scroll down in my Project Explorer, I've created my group in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a 2D wireframe, and I'm going to use the selection tool to just select every part of the rafter that is welded in the workshop. So you can see that all of my rafters, all of my haunches, all of my stiffeners, all of my welded tab plates have gone red. Then I need to select those marked objects, and then I can add those elements to my group. Now the tools that I've just shown you there, the select marked objects in the workshop and how to select the marked objects, I'm going to be going through those tools in a bit more in depth in the checking webinar that I'll be running in a month or so's time. So now if I hit the light bulb on my group, it only shows the items that I added to those groups. So that if I needed to, say I needed to put some holes in that rafter or all of the rafters, it makes it a lot easier to isolate those particular elements if you're always wanting to turn them on and off. The only thing that you guys need to be aware of with groups is you have to manually manage the elements and adding those elements into the group. So for example, if I copied this rafter because I needed to just that particular section of the rafter, although I have my group activated, that new beam that I have created is not associated with the group. So if I turn everything back to how it was, and then I reactivate my rafter assemblies group, that beam is not part of that rafter assembly group because I have not manually added it in. So what I would have to do is once I'd created it, select the item, right click and choose add elements, and then it becomes part of the group. And if I needed it, if I didn't want it in the group anymore, you can say remove elements. But it is just for you guys to be aware, it is something that you manually have to take control of. But they can be very powerful, especially if you're wanting to do things like railings and stairs and you've got them scattered all over the place. Or if you use lotting and phasing, you could set up a search filter for the lot and phase. That would also work. So that is groups for you. The last little bit we're going to look at that's part of the Project Explorer is the model browser. So this is a very useful tool. And what I need to do first, though, I need to number my model. I'll just run the numbering on it. So that's my numbering done. Now, if the workshop had an issue with a fab drawing or they wanted some extra dimensions and they said, oh, we need some extra dimensions on column C3, or we think there's something not quite right with column C3, how would you isolate that quickly in your model. Now you could obviously double click on every column. You could set up a search filter to search for a column with the number C3, or we can use the model browser. What we can do in the model browser is, at the moment, it's sorting everything based on a single part. So if the workshop came in and went, there's a problem with F9, we can click on F9 and it will select everything in the model. So that's this little stiffener here. You have the option at the bottom of your model browser to isolate them. So you can isolate just those items. So that is sorting by single parts. What we can do, let me just remove these, because out of the box this is what you would get. What I can do is I can sort it by assemblies, and then it breaks the model down into assembly. So if there is a problem with C4, I can click on it, it will mark it, and I can click the isolate button, and then we can have a look to see if there is a problem with C4 or if there's something not quite right with it. So that's what you can do for isolating particular parts of the model very quickly with the model browser. What we can also do with the model browser is we can add columns in here, and we'll add the columns in first. So I can say, right, I want to see the material grade, and I want to see the coatings for everything. Now, if I sort everything by the object name, let's say that I've got a few beam sections in there, I can see what is coating as specified, what is galvanized, what I haven't set the material up on, and the same with, the coatings, the same with the materials. You could sort everything by the materials. And this is where it does start to get very clever. I can edit the properties of multiple items at the same time by clicking this Edit Properties button. And what I can do is, let's say we've got some beams that I want to change the section size of. What I can do is choose the beams, and if the last box I click on is the section size, it gives me a drop down, and then I can globally change the section size of those 4 objects. It will take a second just to refresh itself. Just got to be patient with it while it updates. But that will update the section size of those items. And we can do the same with all of the columns that we can add in there. So I jumped ahead a little bit, but that has now changed those section sizes. I was a bit impatient with my click. And if you don't want to edit the properties, you just untick the Edit Properties box. So that is a real quick rundown of all the items available in the Project Explorer. I do just want to run a quick poll with you guys. I should have run it before I started. So I'm going to launch the poll. If you guys could, let me just, what I'd like to do is, can you guys, I've set a poll up. Could you guys just tick for me which areas of the model browser and the Project Explorer that you currently use? You should see it on your screen. It's just collecting the responses. I've got 25, that's 40% of you guys have voted. So we'll just leave it run for a couple more seconds. Okay, thanks for that, everyone. Let me close the poll. We'll go back to the screen sharing. So from that poll, 73% of you use the model browser, 55% of you use model view. So hopefully for you guys who haven't used model views before, this has been helpful. 45% of you use levels and 45% of you use queries. The tools that I've shown you today can really help your modeling. especially if you're working on larger models or areas that you've got broken down into like stairs, railings, steelwork, things like that. If you use these tools regularly on all your projects, it really, really can help increase your productivity within Advanced Steel. That's all I'm going to be covering today. I won't take up any more of your time. If you guys do have any questions, if you want to type them in, and then what I'll do is, if they're quick enough for me to answer, I'll answer them now. If not, I will respond and should be able to send an email to everyone with all the answers to any questions that get answered. Sorry, but that is the end of today's webinar. We as a structures team are here to help you guys out with your Advanced Steel. So if you do have any questions and you need help, or you want to discuss possible workshop days to go into this kind of thing in more depth, there's my contact information. You'll have obviously the contact information for Graitec, but please reach out to us if you do have any questions on anything we've covered today, or just any other Advanced Steel or structures topics within the AEC collection. So I'll leave the webinar running for a couple of minutes if anyone does have any questions that they want to answer. And if not, thank you very much for your time. You will get a follow-up email. We've added a tiny survey. I've added 4 questions to that email, just to ask if you found this webinar useful, and it gives you guys an option to actually, if you want to see webinars on particular topics that we haven't yet covered, if you let us know, I'll get the responses, and then we can look at content for our next set of webinars based on what you, the users, would like to see. So thank you very much for your time today. I'll shut the webinar down, and hopefully we'll see you on the next webinars. Thank you very much.